Hello. Are we online? Yes, we are. Right. So, hello and welcome to the fourth online workshop with myself, ElPeche and Vox Sound. Just going live at the moment. Hello everyone. So just gonna wait for people to join. Hello and welcome guys. I'm just waiting for everyone to join. This is the fourth online workshop with myself, ElPeche, and with Vox Sound. I hope everyone's doing well. And today we're going to be looking at making bass and kick sounds using the operator synth on Ableton. Now, we've had a couple, actually 3 sessions before where I've gone through some of the basic layouts and functions of Ableton. We've had a look at the analog synth last week, actually 2 weeks ago. And today, basically, I want to give you some insight onto how I work with this guy here. So the operator synth. Hopefully, you can all see me properly, see my screen properly, and hear me properly. If there are any troubles in that sense, please let me know. We'll get them fixed on the way. But yeah, I think that's pretty much it for now. Let's just see if we've got more people joining us. So basically, it's a little project I've been working on for the past 2 days. And I've just broken it down a bit. There's actually stuff in the arrangement view already, but we're not going to be using that. And yeah, I basically want to get into how to synthesize your kicks using the operator synth. It's a very cool FM synth that comes with Ableton. And then we're going to be using operator as well to create our bass lines. So that's exciting. So this is what it sounds like, just so you can have a look. So this is my sub right here, and then here I've got kind of a like sequential bass. And here I've got a little pluck going on. This is actually using Serum, which we won't be going into today because it's a whole world within itself. And then we got an ARP bass coming on this channel here. And then finally, there is a rack of multiple operators going on this channel. Which is this sound here. And you can see it's got quite a bit of depth, because obviously I'm working on a number of different synths within a rack, so we're going to get into that as well today. So yeah, just beginning. So let's say we want to use operator to create a kick. At the moment, what I've got on this project is just a sample bass kick, which I made myself, but it's in audio. So if we play that, see, that's just audio coming from an audio clip down here. So say you're using a sample, right, for your kicks, and then you say, okay, I actually want to synthesize that kick. So what I would do is basically get the channel here, and where you've got your audio clips over here, right? And there's a really cool function on Ableton that actually translates this audio into MIDI. So I could right click my audio clip here and say convert drums to a new MIDI track. Now what that will do is it will read whatever's going on in here and convert it into MIDI notes. That's exactly what we need. You can also do that with harmonies and melodies. They tend to go a little bit crazy when you do that because it doesn't always read the correct notes. But for drums, it works pretty well. So we're going to be doing that. So I just hit convert, and it's now converted, hopefully, yeah, to a new MIDI track here. And it automatically loads whatever 606 drums. But then what you've got now is if we solo this channel and take this one off, see, I've got the kicks here and they're now in MIDI. It's also read, which is quite funny, it's read a hi-hat on this kick, which basically means it's quite a good kick because it has something called a click, which translated into MIDI as being a hi-hat. It's basically the high end of a kick. We're not going to be using that, so we can actually zero out those notes. But yeah, this is our kick line here. So it's basically, it looks exactly the same as this, which is the audio, but now in MIDI, which then means we can take this MIDI clip and put it on to this channel, which will be my kick. Now, this is already in a rack, and this is how I work my kicks when I'm synthesizing kicks. So this is my full kick rack here. We are going to start from scratch because I want to explain to you how operator actually works. So just create a new MIDI track here. And again, guys, if any of you are on Ableton at the moment, please try and, like, if you want, try and do whatever I'm doing on your side. If not, I can send you guys, just contact me, I'll send you the project when this is over, and you can have a fiddle around with it. So new MIDI track, just going to load operator into the MIDI track, and we want it to be, basically there's loads of presets, but we want it to be so the default. So we're just going to drag it from its name, and that should be the empty operator there. So we can then drag, copy over this MIDI, and if we solo this channel, now we've got the MIDI from our kick coming into this operator. Now, operator is an FM synth. What that means basically is that we've got 1 or 2 or maybe 3 oscillators, which are these guys here on the left, who are going to be creating the sound, and then they will be modulated via any of the other oscillators. Now, we've got different layouts for that to work, like routing. We're going to start off with linear, which means that this guy, A, is creating the signal, which then gets modulated by B, and then C, and then D. Now, whenever we click on an oscillator here on operator, we've got the level, the course, which is basically almost like the octave of where it's going to respond to the notes that are being played, and the fine tuning. So the octave, if I turn that up, obviously I'm going to go up in octave, and this is fine tuning. Now you have another mode for this, which is fixed mode, which then gives me a fixed frequency to work on. So at this point, it wouldn't matter whatever notes are being played here. See, this is a C1. It wouldn't matter if this is a C1 or a D2. It will still come out as 100 hertz. Now, for kicks specifically, I've got a little formula that I use, which is basically, I'll have the first oscillator anywhere around from 60 to 90 hertz, depending on how high and what genre you're producing. So I'm going to use 80 for this. And again, you can tune this, you can fine tune this by opening an EQ just on the side of it. So an EQ8. And if I double click that, I can now see exactly where my fundamental is, i.e. the note that's being played. So I can see here that it's 80 hertz, E1. You can see it down here in this square here. So if, say, I wanted to tune my kick to D, I would just go to wherever D is. For now, we'll leave it around there. Cool. So, first of all, we need to make our envelope work. Now, if we want a kick, obviously we want a percussive sound, which is going to be short. So the envelope, for those of you who are not aware, is the ADSR. Is something that you can use for basically anything within live and within music production in general. So it's the time of attack, decay, sustain level, and release time for any sound. Now, if we want a short sound, see, now I brought the sustain level down, and the decay time, see, that would be long, that would be short. So I'm going to use it somewhere around there. Again, we can adjust this at the end. So say you want more of like an 808 kick, you go for a longer release time, a longer decay time, sorry. If you want like a shorter, drier kind of kick, then you go for a shorter decay time. So cool, we've got that at 70 hertz. And another thing that's really important is the loop mode. So because we're talking about the kick, right, we don't really want the kick to respond to the length of each note. We just want it to be triggered every time equally. So we're going to leave this in trigger mode. And that means, again, that it won't respond to the length of these MIDI notes. Okay, cool. So we've got A going. Now, B, as I was saying before, when we did the MIDI conversion here, do you remember that we got a hi-hat as well? Now, what that means is we've got 3 parts to a kick at all times: sub, punch, and click. And that, funnily enough, is how we're going to divide these 3 oscillators. So we'll have A doing our sub at 70 something hertz. We'll have B also on fixed doing our punch at around 200. And then as we open the volume for that, we can immediately hear it come out, right? Again, short envelope, somewhere around there, 50 to 60 milliseconds. That's, again, this is not, it's not rules, like there's no rules, it's just the way I do it, okay? And that immediately on the EQ, so if we keep this open to actually see what's happening, if we turn this off, we'll see we've only got the sub note there. Immediately when I turn B on, there's my punch in the low mids, right? Coming at around 200 Hertz. So yeah, this is something that really helps, guys, keeping the EQ open so you can actually see what you're doing on top of hearing it. So I'll leave that around minus 20 dB for now. And then what we can do at this point, again, remembering that the loop mode has to be in trigger for all oscillators. And we can start opening C. And C, what I usually do is around, say, 100 Hertz. But then what I'll do with this guy is just going back a little bit to the whole operator way of working. So when we click on each oscillator, we're going to have the matrix, the envelope and oscillator matrix for that oscillator load up here in the middle. So this is the envelope for A, the envelope for B, and the envelope for C. On top of that, we've got the oscillator section, which is really cool on operator because it actually allows us to draw in our harmonics. So harmonics, to cut it short, is basically the waveform that you're using. So if we put a square wave here, we'll see that we've immediately got loads of harmonics, right? And this is what it would sound like. So if we open up this guy, if we choose a sine wave, we'll have fundamental only, so first harmonic. For this use here, I would go for a sine 4-bit, which is a sine wave which is a little bit rougher, and you can see the waveform here, than the normal sine wave. And again, trigger mode, and again, short envelope. Now for this guy, I would use an even shorter envelope, and you can see they get shorter. I mean, this is the longest one, this is shorter, and this is even shorter. Yeah, somewhere around there. Now, there's a final thing to do on this oscillator that I would usually do, which is the phase dislocation. Now, when I move this guy around, you can see the little waveform moves here as well. What that means is so usually when you're playing a sound, you want the sound wave to start from 0, go up, go back to 0, go down, and finish at 0. This is called one wave cycle. So if I displace the phase, it will start where there's sound already, and that will create a clicky sound in itself. Look, and you can see again here, right? When I turn this off, all the high end comes out. So this is my high end, and as soon as I dislocate the phase here, you see I've got even more harmonics coming through here. So this is my clicky sound. This is exactly what Ableton picked up here as if it was a hi-hat. Okay, so we've got 3 parts of the kick, right? Still sounds pretty dull, and the way to make it sound really nice and full is this guy here. So on the right here, we've got an LFO that you can basically route to any of these oscillators. You've got a filter that has its own envelope and filter curves and cutoff frequency, just a normal filter. And then you've got the pitch envelope, which is also routable to any of your oscillators. So when we turn that on, and I tend to use it around 60%. Now, in the middle here, we have the controls for it. So the initial note displacement would be 12 semitones. I want that to be 48. So that's gone way up. So that's like 4 octaves, right? Even more, 6 octaves. The peak I would like to be on 0, and the sustain all the way down to minus 48. Now what that means is the pitch is going to go down, so it's going to start way up and go all the way down in whatever time I tell it to. And that is what will give us, again, trigger mode, that's what will give us the little tail of sub coming out of our kick. And you can really hear it. The difference with it turn on and turn off. Now this now sounds pretty solid as a kick, right? I'd say it's a good starting point. Now, what you could actually do after this is test different routings for your oscillators. So what this means is the only guy that's creating sound at the moment is A. If I go to this setting here, which is, I usually use either the first one or the fourth one for kicks. Now this means A is creating sound, but it's going in parallel to B and to C instead of in line like this. This setting, when I use it, it tends to turn the kick a bit more crispier, like in the top end. So for, say for like EDM or, I don't know, even like some forms of techno that you want a kick that's really present in the high end, this might be a good idea. And again, when you're changing something all the way at the end, you might want to go back and make some minor adjustments. See, that works quite well. Right, so I'd say that's kind of the base of your kick, like within operator. What I do at this point is basically, let's save the project first, basically group this into a rack, right? And you can literally do that by hitting Command G whilst having operator selected. And that now becomes our kick rack. So I'll just rename that as Kick Workshop. Cool. So you can see that's really big at the moment. And a few cool things about racks is that you can map macro controls to your racks. So say you want to have a kick that you can make longer or shorter if you're playing live or something of the sort. You can literally, by opening up this little arrow here, you get the macros out, and by hitting map, anything that you click on now will be mappable to any of these macros. So what are the controls that are literally in control of the length of my kick? At the moment, it would be the decay of A, because this is where the sound actually comes from, and the decay of my pitch envelope. These two decays have to work together to give length to our kick. So what I would do is map them both to the same macro. Remember, always when you're doing this, remember what your current value is, because it will zero them out. Well, they fixed that. Last edition of Ableton still used to do that. So it hasn't zeroed it out, which is quite useful. But it's good to remember, because then what you want is to draw in here the range for it. Obviously now, if I just click map, right, this is a good setting. This is the setting we arrived at after building the kick. But this just becomes too exaggerated, and this just becomes nothing, basically. So what you want is to map out the minimum and maximum. So I would say, for my ears, that would be around the maximum. So 1.88 for both. And this is where I do that. Just did 2.10. Yeah, that works. And then anywhere around that, maybe. Really short kick. Yeah, so really dry kick, really long kick. Cool. And then obviously you call this, you can, by hitting Command R or right click, rename, you call this decay. And that'll be the decay for your own kick. Cool. Next steps for this, you can also map, I'm not going to do it all because I think it will get quite long, but you could map the volumes, for, say for B and C, and well, you know, I'll do that as well. So the volume for B and the volume for C, and you're going to call them punch and click. Basically, again, setting the limits. Yeah, and then you could also, so the same thing that you can do with this, you're now controlling the volumes for B and C. So when this is all nice and ready, that means you no longer need to go into operator to keep tweaking the individual parameters if you've done a nice rack that has macros that work. Now, after this, for the kick specifically, I would saturate it, and you want to be using the hard curve, DC with a low bass, high depth. I'm not going to go into detail with the saturator. We can do another session for effects in the future. But yeah, basically it's just giving it more texture and more aggressiveness through drive. And again, this is something that I could map to my macro to not have to open this rack, because then I could just have it literally like this. That's my kick. And everything is in that rack. Now, I am clipping a little bit, so it's quite a strong kick already. After that, we compress it a little bit, just to cut off the peaks. And this is basically how I would compress the kick. Yeah, so that's pretty good. We're not clipping here. And we got a strong and present kick. Now, if we want to compare it to this one, this one has a lot more high end and click to it. The reason for that it was made using Kick 2, which uses actually samples for the high end of the kick. It's also something that we could do for this kick if we wanted to, simply by, in this rack here, putting a simpler in and loading it with a high pitch sound. And then that high pitch sound would play along with operator every time it's triggered. I'm not going to do that now, but it is a way to do it. Basically, the plugins that you get, like Kick 2, they already do all of this inside of them, but you obviously have a little bit less control over what you're doing, but they are really cool. Cool. So, having done that, we can now move on to the actual bass sound. So, at the moment, what I've got here is just a couple of subnotes, so going through this MIDI clip, and I have an operator on this channel which is doing my sub. So let's have a listen. Yeah, so it's basically just the 3 notes going through. And what I've done with this operator is basically it's in a couple of racks, and I'll get to that because it is a bit confusing. But yeah, so I'm just gonna do the same thing here, create another empty MIDI channel, and we can load our empty operator and we'll go through it. So just copy this and solo that. So again, same notes, empty operator. How would we go about creating something that sounds like this, right? Cool. We can tell that it's got to be bassy notes for a start. So we are here in the first octave, so that makes sense. And different to what we did before, we're not using the fix mode anymore because we actually want operator to be responding to whatever notes are coming in through the MIDI. So we could start with a sine wave on oscillator A, and we would get something. Let me just solo this. Yeah, we would get something like this. Or, so if we want proper sub, and again, it's always good to have the EQ open by the side so we can see what's happening. So that's our sub note there. And as you can see, it's a sine wave, so it doesn't have any harmonics going up. If I use a different kind of wave, like a sawtooth, see I've got, and that's the really cool thing about operator, that you can actually draw, as we were saying before, you can actually draw these in. See them here. Cool. So we'll go with that for now. You always have to be careful when using the harmonic designer to not make your harmonics higher than your actual fundamental, which is the first note here, because that's the actual note that's being played. These are just harmonics that are being added to it. So if I do that, I completely lose the actual note that's being played. Cool. Sorry guys, I think I lost you there for a second. Are we back? Yeah. Okay, so when we are drawing in our harmonics, again, as I said, we have to be careful to not draw them higher or louder than our actual fundamental note. So we might want to have that coming out of A. It's going coarse 0.5, which means it's going basically an octave down from the actual notes that are being played. And then basically we'll leave this envelope. So this would give us a more shorter kind of bassy sound, or a longer one. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave it with a long decay time, so that it allows us to do a bit more sound design with these guys here. Because if we cut it short here, it means that nothing will come through longer than this decay time. Right, so we've opened B, and we can now choose what kind of wave we're using. I'm going to go with sine for B. And again, we can go down to coarse 0.5. And if you want to detune it a little bit, it will give it kind of a flangery feel, which could be quite cool. And you can see the harmonics moving. And this is because they're out of tune. So if they're in tune, they're static. Look. And if they are slightly out of tune, you can see them moving. That's one of the ways to give it a little bit of harmonic movement. Now, what we could do here, we've got to choose basically what we want to do with these different levels of sound. So at the moment, we've got a long envelope here and a quite square one here. So maybe make it shorter. We get that effect. Or if we do it with a long attack time, that can give it quite a bit of movement as well. Now, with C, and again, because they're in line, C is only actually being played after this envelope of B. So if I want them to both be played at the same time regardless, I could put them in this mapping and then actually give this guy a short envelope. And that will give it the impact of the bass. So it's all about basically at this point deciding what kind of movement you want and what relationship of movement you want in between these oscillators. Obviously, that depends where you want to get to in terms of bass, in terms of sound texture. But this is like, to me, it's one of the coolest processes of playing around with, because you literally could spend weeks just doing this. Cool. I'd say that works for what we want. Remembering that it is a sub, so it has to have at least like long-ish kind of notes. So then we've got a filter on this side that we could still apply. Yeah, that works pretty well. The resonance, which give it quite a bit of. And then here is basically the filter curve. So we're going for low pass at the moment. Again, it's a sub, but we could have like band pass. And then we're cutting at both sides, and so on and so forth. But we're going this. And then the pitch envelope could be quite interesting. So again, the way this works is whatever setting I've got here, so plus 12 to 0. If I go positive percentage, it will apply whatever's here positively. So starting from high and going to low. Or if I go negative, it'll do the opposite. I find this is quite interesting for subs, giving it a little bit of a slide. Cool. Let's see how that works with the kick. Pretty mean, yeah. Cool. So that would be a sub. What we can do with it at this point, let me just see what I've got on this one. So I'm not actually using, okay. So what we could do with it at this point is, again, maybe some saturation. It's always good to fatten up bassy sounds. Pretty well. And again, compression, I'm not even going to get into that now. So that'll be the sub, right? On this track, on this project, I also had a groovy kind of bass going on. So that was... So yeah, making complex basses, and by complex I mean layered basses, you have to be quite careful with the frequencies that you're using. So with this guy here, we can see that we've got a lot going on in the sub area, right? And so therefore, with whatever other layer we're going to put on top of it, should be quite careful in terms of frequencies and clashing them. So if we throw an equalizer here, right, so at the moment with the sub, let me just rename it, so sub workshop. So with this sub here, we've got we are actually lacking a little bit of sub, I've just realized. So what we could do to fix it is quite easy. If we basically just group all of this, and this is, I'm talking about the sub that we just did. If we just group all of this into a rack, right? And say you want a little bit more of sub coming out of this channel. Because you can see that it's not that full. I mean, it's full in terms of harmonics, but it's not full in terms of sub. You've got a lot that's not going on here, right? So what you could do, if you wanted, say, to fill that up a bit more, is literally just, so I've grouped this into a rack. I'll duplicate the chain, and by chain, I mean the whole operator saturator chain. So I'll duplicate that. That's now giving me the first operator and then the second one. I'm going to rename this sub 2. So what's happening now is I'm just duplicating the signal. I don't want to duplicate my signal because that will just mess things up. What I want is this guy to be different from this guy. So I'll basically just swap this to a sine wave, which is very, very good for sub filling. And I'll probably do this as well. Yeah, and you can probably hear that going on now. It's almost like a cleaner version of it, right? That should give us enough filling for the sub, and then if we use them together, and then obviously because this has become a rack, right, if you open this on the clip view here, you've got a sub mixer for it. So just as if it was a drum rack here, if you open a drum rack, you've got the sub channels for each sample, yeah, within the drum rack. So when you do an instrument rack, the same thing applies. So you can have these separate channels for them and control them separately as well. So. Right, so that'd be it for the sub. And so I'm just going to go through a little bit about how we did, how I did this guy here. And then I'll show you a little bit about the other rack as well. Hopefully you've been able to understand a little bit about how operator works in general. Again, there is loads and loads and loads that you can do with this. It's literally endless. It's one of my favorite synths within Live. Yeah, and so going forward, so this would be the groovy bass. And the way I did this was basically, I wrote a few MIDI notes here, very quick, short notes, right? And more importantly, at different velocities. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with velocity, it's basically the strength of the note. So, and you can see it down here in your MIDI clip. Now, this is interesting because the moment we go into our operator, right? And you can see here, this is another rack. I've got 3 of them and I've got them panned, right? So, way this is working, this is the main middle one now, right? Which is basically just sine wave, sine wave, sine wave, quite short ADSRs, and that's it, not much more. And then I've duplicated that and I've panned it left and right. Reason being, I want to create a groovy movement between the panning. And again, this isn't something you'd usually do with bass, but because it's really short, and they are very driven through the drive of the filter, you won't get actually a lot of phase cancellation, which is usually a problem. So our sub is dead in the middle, right? But this, we can have it panned in specific ways that it won't become a problem of phase cancellation. And so basically, when I wrote these notes here, I did them with different velocities, thinking that I wanted an effect of more or less drive and more or less filter openings for every different note. And the way that you can make that happen is basically by if you come here on the filter, I'm just gonna solo this guy. Right. So if we turn the filter off, what we've basically done here is applied the frequency to the velocity of the filter. And what that means is this is now opening and closing according to my velocity on the clip. And so basically just did that, and then for each of the chains, I did it in a different way so that it will affect left and right in different ways, thus creating the movement and the grooviness of it, if you might. And then on top of that, I've got the actual frequency cutoff mapped to my macro, and could then mean I could control that at a live set or even draw in automations. So say this is my MIDI clip, right? Say I want to create a large MIDI clip. I've just duplicated the size of the loop 2 times, and I could then draw an automation for this filter frequency, starting quite low and then opening up. And very aggressive at the end. the stuff that we do within our synths, and this I mean for synths in general, and for racks in general. If you can think of it if you can think of your mappings and your basically where your parameters are and why and what they do, you can then on a later stage use exactly what you've mapped to create further movement through automation. Or say you're performing live, you know, I've got my push here. If I were performing this live, I could just literally go on the channel, so I've got the channel clips here, and then I've got basically my so on the push, the parameter, the macro parameter, I've got it here, so I could literally just, if I was playing live. Hopefully everyone's enjoyed this as much as possible. If you do have any further questions, again, this is just me running through a little bit of how I produce using today using Operator. Yes, mainly I use Operator for kicks and for bass because I find it's very, very, very useful, especially for those elements, but you can use it for virtually anything. And hopefully next week we'll cover my second favorite one, which is Wavetable, which is very, very crazy layouts and sounds coming out of it. If anyone has any further questions, just send me a message on ElPeche or on my personal profile as well. I just want to know, let you guys know, I also teach private lessons. I've been teaching on Zoom, so if anyone's interested in those as well, please let me know. And yeah, that's it. Thank you guys for watching, and have a great evening. Bye.